Greetings, friends. It's another edition of the Landscape and Garden Show with Bob and BT here on the Alive and Social Network. Now, Bob will admit to this, as I will right out of the chute. It's BT here. Hi, Bob. How are you?
Awesome.
We like to pull back the curtain as often as we can, so we're going to share what happened just moments before turning on the microphones and getting our show started today. Bob was commenting on how many voices are in his head as we were setting up microphones and headphones, but I loved your explanation because you've got a wife, you've got how many boys in the family?
5 golden boys.
You got how many people on the staff?
Oh, 20 plus.
You got how many projects working right now?
Oh,
how many clients out there?
So 60 plus.
You do have a lot of voices going through your head.
Yep.
Oh boy,
they're all good voices.
Yeah, it's all good.
Yeah,
and I might add, the spectacularly voiced Bob Harvey, sadly coming off another funeral, but you had the pleasure of singing, a couple of times over this week.
I did.
You?
Thank you. A very dear friend of mine's father passed away, and out by Wilmer, Minnesota, was the funeral yesterday. And before yesterday morning, I really didn't have a voice, so it's still tender, but it'll work today. I promise.
So you're saying you were ramping into the singing with a little harshness? You had a little laryngitis, or just a little soreness, or something?
I think it was kind of viral laryngitis that hits every now and again. It's kind of prompted by the pollen and stuff in the air and all the irritants, but felt great. Just didn't sound very good.
It's a real honor when you're asked to do something like that, isn't it? Whether it's a wedding, and I think more so when you're helping to honor someone who had passed. It's an honor, to be asked to do that.
Well, I am blessed with a circle of friends that music is a big part of their life, as well as other things like what I do for a living in landscape architecture. But it's nice to share the gift, and it's a great way to just celebrate and bring closure. And we do it in those kinds of special settings, weddings, funerals, and garden parties.
Yeah, right on. You're right on. And occasionally on this show.
On the show, so pub. We do the pub.
We'll see how that just plays out. Sometimes we get a pub-like atmosphere on the Landscape and Garden Show. Yes, we do.
Nobody will want to miss our St. Patty's Day show when that comes.
We could bust out a little precursor to that at any time, is what I'm saying.
I'm saving it. They got to come back. We'll see you in 6 months.
Yeah, we'll get the St. Patty's show. We got a Halloween thing worked out. I'm sure we'll have a Thanksgiving vibe going down. Of course, we'll nail something for Hanukkah and Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Yes,
a lot of
we
ho-hoing
will.
going on later.
We will get the jingle bells and the ho-hoing going on for sure. We always like to welcome friends from the landscape and garden community into the room here at the Alive and Social Network. And Dan Claar is here from Minnesota Outdoor Solutions. Good to have you, man.
Thanks for having me.
Are we going to ask Dan to be a part of our singing trio? Dan, do you got any singing talents there,
I think
Claire?
It's best if I stay out of that one.
He can snap his fingers.
We'll let Dan. You're already sounding good on that microphone, so we'll let you be our, master of ceremonies guy.
Sure.
You'll be the ringleader.
You can coach me up.
You'd be one of those. Can everybody take their seat, please? It's time. It's almost time for the show. You can be that guy.
Exactly. Well, I did play sports, so we did yell a lot when we played hockey.
So. Right on. You are you still into it as an adult too? Do you get out there and skate or
a little bit with my
stuff?
kids now only? So
yeah. How old are they, Dan?
3 and 5.
Oh man, so just little tykes.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's
fun.
we do take into account with some of our clients that are big hockey players when we're doing their landscape.
I would think so.
You will notice that there are certain parts of the landscape that remain wide open.
Yeah,
and we have what we call perimeter landscaping.
What did you call it again, Bob? I'm sorry. Perimeter. Gotcha.
Perimeter landscaping. It's like, well, as long as we can see it, enjoy it from our home, but everything between here and that point is flooded.
Yeah.
For 3 months.
Sure.
Yeah.
What a great use of your backyard in the winter, right?
Oh man, or front yard, or whatever the case may be. I've got quite a few friends that have that going on, and it's an annual affair for them with the liner and set up the boards and get the flooding going, and then they get a call from the city saying, do you have a broken pipe in your basement? Have you checked? Are you out of town? Because and I get the same thing. I get the same call whenever I fill my backyard pond every year. If I drain it and clean it, on the years I drain it and clean it, usually every other year. But I get that little ring message, or or a letter, a real quickly sent letter.
Exactly. Saying what's wrong with you?
Are you
Why
sure?
Are you so much water?
Yeah, because they can see that number pinging up pretty quick when you got 7,000 gallons there. It's pretty funny.
Right.
Well, the landscaping does tie in with the outdoor hockey rink in the wintertime too. It's amazing what we do. If we surround it with trees and evergreens and stuff, and then they put lights in them, it makes it very festive. And and then it's the backdrop for the gardens in the summer. So it actually all ties in. It's just one of those things that we do in our investigation or taking inventory with our clients as we create and go through the design process. Is all those kinds of activities that play a role in a good design solution.
Do you ever put any things into the ground that will be the fasteners for the boards? Something that's a little more permanent, or people do they ever want anything like that? I'm just kind of riffing here, thinking about people that are going to do this every year. They might want something to make the process a little easier.
You can hide some of that stuff in your border edging of your beds and things like that.
Yeah.
So there's ways around it, and it's an education thing, making sure people that deal with the lawns and the landscaping and gardening and so forth are aware of their function and what they're there for.
Yeah, what's
so
this,
the
what's
answer
this hole
is yes.
in the ground all about? This concrete thing or posting or something like that. Yeah. Minnesota Outdoor Solutions, how long have you had that business going, my brother?
Well, we're on our 20th year, actually.
Nice, 20th year this year.
Yep, that's right.
That's very cool. Has it been your gig the whole time? I mean, I've
had a couple partners
Okay.
along the way, but the last 11 years I've been flying solo.
Good, going it on your own.
That's right. Right.
Give our podcast listeners a little insight into the beginnings of all this. You and a couple other guys, or partners, men or women, either way.
That's
what was
correct.
It like?
I started with a partner who actually is still in the industry. He took our at that time we did more snow plowing. He took that piece of the business and spun that off. And then I had another partner for a short time as well. But really, what we've focused on is hardscape construction from the beginning.
Okay.
So lots of different hard materials that we work with.
And so he's off doing the snow thing and the winter maintenance.
That's
Again,
right.
It's called Outdoor Solutions, so it's any number of things that way. But you were able to focus in specifically on this side of the business.
That's right. Yep. And that's how it played out, and it's worked out great. So, and it's kind of nice. It was nice to have a partner in the beginning. You kind of need that extra support.
Sure.
The nice thing about being the sole owner is those decisions are all on you, but they happen fast.
Yeah.
You don't have to consult with anyone.
Right. Yeah, you can be a little more nimble that way.
That's right.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, and both sides of the sword say the same thing. The decisions are all on you, and the decisions are all on you.
That's right. If you're wrong, you're looking in the mirror, right?
Yeah, that's all right. That's okay. You only got one person to answer to
That's
that
right.
way. What would you consider your specialty to be, Dan? I mean, what's the biggest thing that you're called upon to do? When hardscaping is a broad definition of a lot of things that can. And you know what? Why don't you do that for? We have a lot of listeners here that are in many ways new, to the landscape and garden groove. We're not going to make assumptions that people know all the terms that we're talking about, and that's why I'm asking you to explain, the hardscape world when it comes to landscaping.
Right. That's a great question. Everything's specialized, all phases of construction now. So we, even in landscaping, we've kind of cut it in half, and we say softscape or we say hardscape. Softscape typically refers to plantings and materials that are soft, and the hardscape refers to materials that are hard. So that can range anywhere from horizontal materials. By that I mean patios, driveways, walks, terraces, that sort of thing. And then the vertical, the retaining wall aspect of landscaping. So all the different hard products you can use to build walls as well.
Sure.
So,
and any kind of pathways. I mean, again, anything that's, like you said, that's hard.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. Bob, the session we did a while ago with Lisa, as we were talking about the labyrinths, I want to ask this question of the two of you. Have you ever combined on a project like that, with the hardscaping and the labyrinth, or unique pathways and things like that? The two of you guys together.
Well, that's how we kind of got to work together.
Really?
Is that we liked what we saw in Dan's work, and we threw out some ideas because we really need people that can be creative and efficient and proficient in their art and skill, and have the ability to be somewhat flexible and accommodating. And Dan is the guy for the job for that, for those situations. Some of that, when we talk about the hardscape and the softscape, some of that kind of organic evolution keeps happening between client and designer, and sometimes there's some changes along the way or new discoveries, or there's some potential roadblocks, i.e. there could be something that was in the ground that we didn't know about, like a very large ledge or something that would preclude us from doing the original design. So being flexible that way, and then also having the knowledge that he can make recommendations to us as well when we're looking for certain types of things in the design process. And we say, what do you recommend for the best type of paver material in this situation? It's going to be in the front of the house. It's very formal. We don't want, something that's going to fade or crack. Lightweight use versus heavyweight use. Natural stone selections and sourcing some of the more unusual types of stone that we like to use. Sometimes we use them in water features and those kinds of things. And so Dan will collaborate with us on those kinds of things and can help get those things to flourishing for us.
As I mentioned at the beginning of the program here, pulling the curtain back a little bit, we were invoking a Bob Dylan song before we got the show started as well. In that, given Dan's background and what he does, the Bob song that came to mind was "Everybody Must Get Stoned." Well, Dan will stone you on the backyard garden, and he'll stone you when you're. I'm riffing now. I'm doing a bad job with my on the cuff lyrics here, off the cuff lyrics, but
yeah, you got the voice down though.
Yeah, you got the voice. You got the voice.
It was Bob today.
Yep, mumble a lot. That always helps.
Yeah, we really like to do his landscape too.
What did he say? Yeah, I can see all the people in the Ed Sullivan Theater here after that second to the last Letterman show. They're all nudging each other. What did he say? What is that a Minnesota accent? What did he say?
Exactly.
I know he's from Minnesota. You know that, right? You brought up the world of creative stones. And how Dan has a lot of background in that, and I'm going to speak to you in that regard, Dan. Do you spend a lot of time in places that you're just looking at all this material and just really, like Bob will start riffing on some things that are in bloom, and we'll get to that segment on the show here, and different plants and all the things that he does, and the design stuff that he does. And I know he's got to explore a lot of those visual things too, but for you, it's a real tighter focus. I mean, you're looking at rock, you're looking at stone, talking to people that deal in that kind of stuff, and just compiling it all. Take a lot of pictures, I imagine, that sort of thing?
I do, yeah. And I deal with a lot of, when you've done this long enough and you've reached a broad base of clients, you get some stone snobs, I call them.
Yes.
And so they're very
we might
particular.
fall into that.
Yeah. I probably do, but when the shoe's on the other foot, I don't like anyone that's smarter than me.
But that's got to be just a real treat. Did you... Does it make you sort of a part-time a geologist too, of sorts? I mean, or I don't know. Geology really is more the strata of the earth itself, but you know what I'm getting at.
Absolutely, yeah, it does. And the thing is, after 20 years, we go back to some of the projects that we built 20 years ago,
sure.
And you get to see how these products perform over that length of time. So that part's really interesting, and if you're good at what you do, you take that knowledge and you use it, in your future projects. So I do try to incorporate that in every job that we do. And I love stone. I love hard products. I try to educate myself on them as much as I can.
Can I see your nails real quick? Just like...
I just trimmed them, BT, so they're not too bad today.
Well, yeah, not only that, there's no dings there, there's no bruises. I've watched some of those stone guys work, and you get some dings out there, man. Those little, even a small rock falls there, and ow! Well,
Not if you're good, BT. Not if you're good. That doesn't happen. You don't get hurt.
The thing that we look for when we're working on a project and developing a design is that we take into account how important the hardscape plays sometimes almost exclusive or major role,
sure.
Down to the projects where the hardscape may play more of a minor role. So if we talk about those two terms, softscape and hardscape, that's a moving needle on the spectrum where some things are more demanding, where the softscape may predominate. But it can't, in a lot of instances, exist without the hardscape element incorporated, and how we incorporate it, and what are the types of hardscape that we incorporate, the natural stone and that kind of thing, to a full, maybe we're doing an area that is more public or campus-like,
sure.
Where there's a lot of hardscape involved. We need seating, we need paths, we need lighting, we need those kinds of things, water features and stuff. And then how do we get that so that it doesn't come out as a cold kind of desolate kind of feeling because it's so much hardscape, but that it can still have the quantity of hardscape without that because with the right choices of materials.
Yeah.
And we'll talk a lot about the different types of materials, because I think that's the part where people would like to know more about, what is it I choose? If I want a path, what kind of a path? If I want a fireplace or a patio or a wall, what is it? And then we as designers always look at, how does it relate to the surrounding architecture? Is it something vintage? Is it something contemporary? Is it eclectic? Can we do both? And so getting those kinds of things, dialoguing in the design, really, then we actually get to see it evolve. And that's very gratifying for all the people involved.
Bob speaks often about, in the design process, envisioning 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And I imagine you do the same thing, but you also, and both of you get the benefit, like you just mentioned a second ago, of being able to look back on projects that were 20 years ago and the thoughts that you were going through, the procedures that you were using, the stones you were using, and really see how that plays out. And I would imagine you got to be honest with yourself. Sometimes you go, well, I could have done this. Now that I know more, so I could have done something differently.
That's happened a few times.
Yeah,
absolutely. No,
sure.
it happens on every project. I always tell my guys, you should learn something new on every project, and I do as well.
Yeah. Got to carry that stuff forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's get into that in just a bit. Some of those different stones and ideas when it comes to pathways, patios, structures, whether it's pizza ovens, fire pits, and all that. Good to have you here, Dan. We're going to make our way over to Bob and BT's weekly segment. And Bob takes the reins on this more than anything, because we got to find out what's blooming. And after some big rain that we had here the last number of days, we are looking pretty good here right now.
Yeah, we are. I think this week demonstrated probably as close to ideal conditions as we could have this time of the year. Mm-hmm. Temperatures are really good because what moisture does come isn't evaporating very quickly with the cooler temperatures and some overcast skies. So the plants that are growing so fast are grabbing that moisture and putting it to putting it into
energy, and holding on to it
and production.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really good, and it's allowing the root systems of the plants to get established. We're not getting so much rain that the root systems aren't growing because everything's surface, everything's near the top, but the roots are still stretching and growing downward to look for some of that moisture. Yeah. So we still have a deficit, but we're eating away at it with each rain event that we get. And some parts of this part of Minnesota benefited better than others, depending on your location. It was kind of a hit and miss for a lot of areas, but overall, everybody saw some decent amount of rainfall. And there was even a little hint of frost the last couple of nights in outlying areas, but things are coming through just fine. Couldn't be better planting conditions, so our planting season continues with those kinds of things, trees, shrubs, perennials. Depending on the types of annuals, with the temperature, I pretty much are doing everything except the really soft tropicals, as I would say.
Sure.
Unless they're in really protected locations, you're going to baby them.
I have a question for you. That we've had the rain and the overcast skies now, and I could be off the mark here. That's why I'm asking the question. I want to know, especially with new plantings, if you get this rain, again, not too much that it's going to damage the roots, but then you don't get a whole lot of sun. Does the plant then devote more energy to that root growth, because the sun isn't saying, "Hey, come up here"? It's not saying to the greenery, reach up for me. I want to devote more. I want you to devote more energy to this, the above ground part. Or am I off the mark here? Does the plant just do what it needs to do?
It does what it needs to do, because even in overcast situations, the strength of the sun is coming through the clouds.
Okay.
And so the energy is still being absorbed. It may be in lower amounts for photosynthesis, but the plants are definitely getting the light requirements that they need to photosynthesize and create that green. So if we had a lot of overcast weather and a lot of rain, you might see a little bit of yellowing, as some of the chlorophyll wouldn't be forming. But
the plant doesn't say, well, there's not as much sun, I'm going to put more energy down here now. No, it doesn't. It's just going to do what it needs to do.
Generally, root temperatures for growth on the cooler side generate more root growth.
Okay.
But
so it's more of a temperature thing.
Yeah,
then,
everything is firing right now.
Yeah.
Plants are requiring a lot of nitrogen right now, and so everything's just on fast forward now.
Goes back to what we were talking about, especially 3 weeks ago, which is composting around those plants and getting that food source in there.
And now that our bulbs are kind of wrapping up, if you're fortunate enough to have some late season blooming tulips, as we have in a lot of our gardens, we still have a lot of tulip display. it's good to fertilize those bulbs if you're planning on leaving them in the ground because they require nutrients to replace what they just spent putting out the bloom. So if you deadhead the flower head off of the tulips and fertilize those leaves and leave them alone, don't cut them off or any of that unless you're kissing them goodbye and you don't want any next year. Dig them out. We do treat many of the tulips as annuals. There are some that are more perennializing.
Yeah, but they need those leaves to continue to photosynthesize.
And they will eventually die back on their own probably sometime through the end of the month of June, and you just kind of plant things around them and hide them and leave them alone.
Until, if you want to transplant them, then when do you do it? Because I have a similar question about some irises, but finish with the tulip thought first.
Well, the tulips, I would leave them alone. I would leave them where they are, not transplant. If you're going to transplant them, wait until after the bulbs have completely shut down. You give a gentle tug, the stem snaps.
A little bit of stem that's left.
Down.
Yep, okay.
Then you can dig them up and store them in a dry storage situation in the dark in a cold cellar until fall, and then you plant them with the rest of your other bulbs.
Because you
can put them in a new location.
And put them in a new location until next... Put them in a new location next spring, then. Get them in the ground in the spring?
No, fall.
Oh, in the fall. Okay, I misunderstood you there. I'm sorry there. I'm sorry.
Your fall bulb planting, daffodils, tulips, hyacinths, those kinds of things will be September, October.
Gotcha. Okay, I misunderstood you. Good. I'm glad you clarified that for me. Now, because this is a piggyback question for me and for Suzanne. We got an email from Suzanne out of Coon Rapids.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we put out, reach Bob, info at edelweissdesign.com or me, BT, BEETEA voice at gmail.com, and Suzanne sent an email, and it piggybacked on something. I'm doing the same thing. She wanted to move some irises. I've got some irises too on the side of the house where they're going to have to be moved because I've got some of that foam insulation that's on the foundation. Got it. And it's pulling away, and I'm going to have to replace it, and I'm going to dig down a little bit. But the bulbs are all in the way. They're all these beautiful irises, beautiful bearded irises. Now they're not blooming yet. But again, is it the same as the tulips then? What I'm going to want to do is wait, let them bloom, deadhead those flowers, fertilize them so they're nice and strong, and you continue then if it's the same thing here. Yeah.
The irises, if you're talking the German bearded iris. They're
lovely.
Getting ready to bloom. They have a wonderful scent. They're yellows and purples and all shades in between. Mm-hmm. Let them finish their bloom. Now would not be a good time to move them. Most plants, when they're in the bloom stage, it's not recommended that they be transplanted. They can go into a shock and
I've
shut
heard
down.
That. Yeah.
So when they finish blooming, it would be best to wait because then we have the heat of the summer that sets in, and that makes transplanting difficult for a lot of plant material. So let's wait until the heat is on the ebbing side, which would be more like August.
Okay.
And then we can take those iris bulbs, divide them. Some people dip them in a very mild solution of like a Clorox or kind of thing, something to sanitize the bulbs a little bit in case there's been any disease.
All right.
If they look healthy, skip that stage. And then reset them and set them on the high side. You don't want to bury them too deep because they will rot. They like to sit high and dry. Are German irises. And I always put the tubers facing south when I plant them. There's a little fan that looks like, and then the tuber that comes out, and I put that tuber facing the sun.
Okay.
So it gets lots of good sun, and then they will do well. They like well-drained soil, hot sites.
Good sun. So that being said, there's really no need to, like with the tulips, obviously, it's more of a spring thing, and you said we're going to, let them die back, and that's going to happen late June.
Yep.
Store them in a good storage situation, and then plant them in the fall.
Yep.
These it's going to be
right away.
It's going
to from one spot to the other in the same 20 minutes.
But as soon as the cycle is done, as soon as do you need to deadhead those flowers and then let some of that nitrogen and some of that fertilizer build up in there first again?
I'll
do the same sort of thing as the tulips.
Yeah, I'll deadhead the stalks.
Yeah,
and then you can feed them a little bit. And generally, people divide and move irises because they need to be divided.
Yeah.
They get very dense, and really thick clumps, and then the flowers shrink in size, and the bulbs shrink in size, and you get more vegetative and less floral.
Less floral, yeah.
So, but that's one of the things that's starting to bloom right now is our irises. There's one called Iris intermedia, which is a shorter iris. It's only about 10, 12 inches tall. and they're found commonly in rock gardens and that kind of thing. There's also Iris cristata, which is kind of a woodland iris, very, very tiny, 2-3 inch tall.
Oh, that sounds
iris,
lovely.
A rock garden plant, and can take some shade. And
that's the kind of thing I should put in my alpine landscape,
yes,
because
absolutely.
I don't want anything too tall
must.
there. Yeah,
an alpine must. And those do very well, and they're all blooming right now. They're really, really fun. So in the perennial scene, we're looking at those. We're looking at, as we approach Memorial Day weekend, some of the peonies are getting close to bursting. Did you just notice in the last week or so how even last 7 days, literally, where those peonies went from
just
4,
little
5,
stubs.
10 inches up to full-blown shrubs. I mean, 30 inches plus.
I swear I can hear those. Like when
hear
you hear,
them grow.
Yeah, when you hear the groaning of the cornfields.
Yeah,
you can
just
hear that those stalks growing.
I'm gonna bloom. I'm gonna bloom. And that's what's exciting about them. The finish line for peonies, some of the varieties, is that Memorial Day weekend, and that's coming up. So that's kind of a symbol, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that later if we have time, about Memorial Day and the ritual of planting on Memorial Day, people going to cemeteries, the red, white, and blue theme, all those kinds of things are coming up this weekend. It's kind of a ritual in our culture, and it's really neat.
Mm-hmm.
And some suggestions on that. And peony is one of those things people think of around Memorial Day.
Dan, have you ever had a call for a red, white, and blue landscape of some sort, or red, white, and blue stones, or anything like that out there?
Not yet, no.
We'll work on that for you.
Oh, I got a little nod to America, Dan. I want you to help me out with that. Find a little hardscape there for me. What else is blooming out there?
Well, we have some people are looking at, I think I mentioned this on the last show, the round balls that are looking like peony or hydrangeas that are opening. It's the snowball bush. The viburnum snowballs are really coming in. Some of the other types of lilacs that are a little later blooming than the vulgaris variety, which is the big old-fashioned line the freeways with the lilac colored and some of the whites. Those are fading away now, but they put on a good show with the weather conditions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're still persisting.
We have the Meyer variety of lilacs that are starting to open, and those are a little more diminutive inside, a little finer texture, but they're opening. One variety is called Tinkerbell. Then we have Miss Kim's, and we have dwarf Korean lilacs, and the sports of different types of French lilacs that are all starting to open up now.
My Miss Kim tree is just going crazy. It's going crazy.
Yeah, and the buds are really swelling on the tree form lilac, the ivory clump, they call it.
Now, I got a question for you. I planted a lilac bush last year, and this spring I had some flowering, stems come up, but then they all desiccated. They all dried out. Now I didn't get any flowers. I didn't do any trimming. Nothing at all. Now it just didn't appear to have any flower action to it at all. And maybe I wasn't paying close enough attention. It might have been the leftover vestiges of last year. But I'm getting no flower on it this year, but it's growing like a son of a gun. Is it maybe just, not flowering for a year while it branches out?
It's a new planting.
It's a new planting.
Yeah. They will take their time and energy into vegetative, producing stems and leaves and developing the root system. They'll tend to push flowers when they have a reserve. And I've seen very young shrubs. I mean, we plant what they call like 5 and 10 gallon size, homeowner size, I call it, lilac shrubs. And those are sometimes full of blooms. And just today I pulled some of the Tinkerbells that were in a 7 gallon, and there must have been 20 plus blooms on this one little shrub. They were like weighed down with flowers. And sometimes the confinement in containers and so forth stimulates blooming as well. Plus, they do things in the nursery industry to get things to bloom.
Because they want to sell the bloom.
Right. It's a visual.
Now, because it's only stems at this point, and it's only green, I want to trim this thing up to
shape it up.
Yeah, shape it up, and I don't have to really worry about where I'm cutting because it's not a bloom thing, so I can make that happen.
Right. No, and keep in mind the things that bloom in the spring. As soon as they finish up, like rhododendrons that finish. So just yesterday we were shearing and shaping some rhododendrons. When the lilacs are done, same thing.
Yeah, I can do it then.
If they've gotten too large and you want to take them down, that's the time to do it. If it blooms in the spring, prune in the summer. If it blooms in the summer, prune in the fall, after it has bloomed, like late summer kind of thing, or very early spring.
Now, my Miss Kim tree, like I said, it's going gangbusters, but it's really gangly. I haven't done anything to it for a while. So it's a short lady. The trunk stands about 4 or 5 feet tall, and then the branches go out.
Yep.
And I like the shape of it. I like where it is, but it's taking up too much space in this part of the landscape. So I really want to shore it up into a nice tighter little ball, more of a circle. Once the Miss Kim is done blooming, I can pretty much go in there and just kind of trim it where I want to. Then, huh?
And you can shear, you can thin it. Sometimes things get cut just from the outside, but it's good to go in and actually do some thinning and identify the strong growing stems that are going to keep the structure of the plant in place so that it's not susceptible to storm damage and things like that. But so in the columbines right now, that's one of my favorite perennials. There's the wild columbine, the native that grows in the woods, and then all the cultivars that are actually blooming right now. And those are really, really cool plants. Aquilegia is the scientific name.
Beautiful flower there.
They're fabulous, and they're long lasting, and they also make a good cut flower. We've been taking advantage of the lilacs and the tulips and the bleeding hearts to create arrangements, at our dining room table, basically for the last 3 weeks.
Nice,
and that's been really fun. The poppies are going to start popping soon. Globe flower, which is the scientific name Trollius, is found in wettish woodland areas in sun. Bright buttercup yellow flower. The dianthus family is now starting to spring up as we get a little warmer sun, not necessarily air temperatures. People think it's just temperature that influences the blooming and the growth of plants. But all you have to do is sit in your car with your windows rolled up on a 45-degree day like yesterday. If the sun came out 50 degrees, and see how hot it gets in your car, how fast, compared to back in January. So we know there's a lot of power in that sun right now. And so those plants are harnessing that energy. So the other thing, the heucheras that are blooming right now, they pushed out those beautiful burgundy leaves, and the little stalks are starting to rise. Coral bells, some people know them as coral bells, the green leaf ones with the red flowers, and those kinds of things. So there's things starting to open up from the trees and shrubs now into the perennials for pollination. So there's a lot of pollinating opportunities for the different types of insects and so forth. So I think that's probably a pretty good list. Yeah, the rosebuds. That's a lot of stuff. Rosebuds are forming, and those are starting to push, and hostas, of course, all that wonderful foliage is now unfolding, and so we're seeing a lot of activity.
Yeah, sounds good, and it smells good too,
and
it looks great. I love the cut stuff too. I've been doing the same thing, getting out there and just grabbing some little snippies here and there, and it's just so nice to bring some of that stuff into the house.
There's another plant that doesn't get mentioned very often, and it's called euphorbia. Spurge would be the common name, and it's this bright yellowy lime green perennial that the flowers are really bracts. They're just these little kind of leaves almost, but they're really flower petal bracts, and they are lime green and yellow, and they make this round mound. Cushion spurge would be a name that many people might recognize in the gardening community, and they're great fillers and backdrops to those spring bulbs and to some of these other emerging perennials we talked about, like the columbines and things like that. Geranium is starting to bloom as well, or perennial geraniums. So.
Yeah, those wild geraniums are going crazy too, and they're really starting to spread.
Yep. And they look great amongst all the beautiful stones that Dan puts in the landscape.
Absolutely. And they provide some real nice cover to keep the weeds away, which I also like. And better to have a blanket of green than to have some of that nasty stuff poking through. Hey, Dan, when it comes to pathways, Dan Claar is with us from Minnesota Outdoor Solutions. And again, congratulations. 20 years this year. That's just outstanding.
Yeah,
that's a great achievement, man. Actually, before I ask you the question about pathways, as we begin our conversation, rejigger our conversation with Dan, how many people you got on your crew? What's going on for this summer of 2015, this 20th anniversary summer? What's a crew look like for you? Because summer's a big time for you. Obviously.
It is. Yep, this is our time, and we typically run 2 to 3 person crews.
Okay.
And right now we got about 8 guys out in the field, and then myself as well. And I spend a decent amount of time in the field. I still like installing.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
So if you got 8 out there and you're included, so probably like 3 different crews kind of out there, doing different things in different spots. And
Exactly.
sometimes you got to have 6 there to get a project done for a day or 2 or maybe longer. But
That's right. Everything is kind of dependent on what we're doing.
yeah, lets you spread out a little bit more. What's been the biggest thing for folks lately when it comes to connecting parts of the garden? I'm going to start with the pathways here. Are people still really into natural stone? Is it a combination of sometimes you get the request for the natural stone, or they prefer more of the formal pathways, the bricks and the landscape pavers and things like that?
Sure, good question. Recently we've seen much more of a trend shift back to natural stone, and part of the reason for that is we're starting to introduce more stones. We're stretching our boundaries in terms of the quarries that we get product from, and then how they actually fabricate the product has changed as well. You're starting to see natural stone that is gauged, and what that means is the stone is all consistent in terms of its thickness. So when you go to install, it makes the installation much easier, which is really not the important thing about a gauge stone. What it really does is make the surface perform much more efficiently.
Sure.
So,
Less places to trip up, and just has a smoother surface overall, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And in about, I guess it was 5-6 years ago, they came to the market with a polymeric sand, which has helped too, because it's basically what it's done is taken stones that traditionally were laid in a mortared format where it required a lot of time and energy to build, and now all these stones can be set in what we call a floating system. So it's much more efficient to build and much more affordable for the homeowner.
So that sand base, how deep you're going with that, and what kind of sand did you call it? It's polymeric.
Polymeric sand.
Yeah.
It's a sand that has now the really the best polymeric sand on the market no longer has a Portland element to it. And if you know anything about concrete and mortar, that Portland is kind of a key ingredient. But what it does is the sand that becomes hard when it mixes with water.
Okay.
So it looks and performs like a mortar.
So you lay that base down there.
Yep.
You wet it down before you put the stone on top then, or do you just let nature do its thing by the moisture reaching in there over time?
Typically for more formal structures, patios, walks, we'll do our full excavation and then we'll do a Class 5 limestone base.
Sure.
Okay.
Yep.
On a patio or a walkway, you'll do what we call a subcut, which is an excavation. So you'd have a minimum of 6 inches of compacted Class 5. And that really, becomes your structure, and the stone almost becomes a fascia.
Sure.
And then you lay your sand or your chips, depending on what sort of bedding material you want to use. And then in the joints of the actual stone is where you use the polymeric sand. And what that does, it offers a couple
okay,
really...
in the joints then, okay.
That's
gotcha.
right, just in the joints, yeah, not in the bedding material.
Okay, that's where I was getting confused. I
Yep.
was thinking that sand was the base and the bedding, and that was going to get hard. No, I see where you're going here.
No, and I'm glad you brought it up because I tend to jump ahead.
No, that's okay.
So the polymeric sand goes in the joints.
Yeah.
And what that does is it gives you a joint that's firm and it's solid, right? And it prevents weeds from penetrating.
Sure.
It prevents ants from colonizing. There's just a lot of benefits to that polymeric sand. In the past, we didn't have that. So when you worked with natural stone and it's an imperfect product, what do you do in the joinings? What's your joining system going to be?
Yeah.
And it became a real problem from just a functionality long term for these surfaces. But
Yeah,
now,
and an aesthetic thing too. You don't want to put concrete in there. You don't want it to look that way. You got to have something that has that natural sandstone meeting stone look.
right. So that's one of the factors is really kind of help the natural stone. I guess
That's
if you
pretty
want to
cool.
call it a revolution of
Yeah.
of all these new products coming to our market and other markets as well. And people are stretching more. They're going. For example, we're doing a project, with Bob, and the stone's coming from Montana. So, people will go and search out other quarries that are maybe a little bit farther than they traditionally would.
Okay. Now I gotta think here. You're laying down a pretty sizable base, like you said. You got 6 inches of Class 5. You got some sand floating on top of that, or the chips, as you mentioned, and then that fascia, that stone, essentially being the top coating. You get that polymeric sand in between. You let that set up. Now over time, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you might get some cracks. You might get some, or even given the gauge of the landscape paver stone, you might get a crack there. You just don't know. I'm guessing here that my question is going in this direction. My comment is, can you then take some of that polymeric sand, just kind of lay it in a crack, or lay it, and then put some more moisture on there, and boom, it seals it up, and it looks like everything else does, then, right?
That's exactly right.
That's pretty cool.
And there's a maintenance element to the polymeric. It doesn't last forever.
Sure.
But it's a great product, and it's a product that has helped simplify the installation process, and homeowners, really like it.
Yeah, it's like when you go in and redo the mortar between bricks on a brick house. You got to do that every now and again.
Tuck pointing.
Yeah, tuck pointing. Yeah, you don't have to go that deep, but you got to make sure that surface stuff that gets oxidized and that wears out over time. Then you drill it out, you fill it in, and everything's good for another 50 years or whatever the case may be.
That's true. That's really the great thing about floating systems, about pavers and natural stone, is it's fixable, and it's fixable without tearing apart and starting over. And so that's one of the things, if you're dealing with a poured patio, poured sidewalk, once concrete cracks, that's kind of the end. You're done. You're starting over. And with the beauty of pavers and natural stone and these other products is that is not really a significant issue.
Or if you have a manufactured paver and something happens, then you're tearing out a whole stretch of it. And as good as you try to make it, you can sometimes see that repair. You just can't help it,
Well, you're replacing with...
If I did it.
That's exactly right, BT.
If Claire did it and his crew did it from Minnesota
that's right.
Outdoor Solutions, it'd be a different story.
Now you're getting the idea.
See, now we're talking. Now we're talking business. So the natural stone is a big return for folks. Now, how about when it comes to patios? Are people doing the natural stone there for the living space area too? Are they still kind of more into the manufactured pavers for that, or again a combination of the both?
Combo of both. Natural stone's more expensive, so if people are strictly looking at economics, a concrete paver is going to be a less expensive option, and still a very good option. I'm a paver guy too. I love pavers, and they are extremely durable, and they still, in my opinion, aesthetically, and maybe Bob can comment on this, a significant upgrade over a poured concrete or even a stamped concrete. In my mind,
I love the Anchor stuff. I got in my backyard to use them as a brand, but that's what I got, and it looks great.
And in this industry, they're constantly coming up with new products and new products that we can look at that they can upgrade. They address the issues about what concrete pavers give us in terms of sometimes challenges, and they go, let's try these things. And there's clay pavers as well,
okay.
and so what it does is it just gives us a lot of options, so we can meet the budget with those options and still have a good outcome. Great outcome.
I tell you what I like about the pavers as opposed to the poured, and then also the natural stone is even with the sand that hardens in between, what have you, you get a lot of that nice drainage that goes right through the pavers, and so if you got some tree roots running underneath there, or any number of things, and just so it's not draining off to one area and sloughing off in a swale to the front yard or whatever, it's gonna soak in the spot.
It does have an element of permeability, and depending on how you install, and in today's world, a lot of homeowners really are concerned about that. They want to reduce the amount of water that's getting in the storm sewer.
Yeah.
So a permeable paver is obviously an extremely permeable surface, but even natural stone, if done in certain ways, definitely has an element of permeability that a poured concrete simply doesn't have.
It's going to be sealed up. Yeah, totally sealed up completely. So people are getting into either one of those groups. They just, it's what they like. It depends on the kind of look that they want, and
it does.
There's not necessarily a trend going in one direction or the other.
Not necessarily. We are seeing more natural stone. However, I love pavers. I've got pavers at my house.
Now, what about boulders? Is that that's got to be like, you use the big boy toys, the big girl toys. You're moving these rascals around. That's got to be just one of the funnest things to work with. In my mind's eye, that's just got to be a gas.
Right. Boulders are a great way to build a wall, great way to retain. And the nice thing about boulders, if they're big enough, it takes all the engineering out of the equation. You don't have to be very smart, because when you have a 4,000-pound rock,
put big rock there.
Exactly. Not going to move in a heavy rain.
That's good.
So we're seeing more and more boulders again because the boulder is natural. So fieldstone, obviously in Minnesota, that's our boulder, right? And most people know it as river rock. It's just a bigger version of river rock, and that's a great rock. It is so hard, and they really look the same. I look at boulder walls I did 20 years ago, and they haven't changed.
Yeah, they're still holding up.
The thing that here's where the design component comes in is when you're working with the natural boulder and rock outcroppings, as we call them, there's a combination. We can put a lot of different things together. Is that you get a personal artistic expression in using these in an artistic way. And that takes an eye. Mm-hmm. Whereas there's many situations you can probably visualize where it looks like we're lining up dinosaur eggs.
Yeah, exactly.
One next to the other, or the pearl necklace.
Yeah.
And there's no creativity. And you take these materials and you go, how can I make them work where they look like they almost naturally fell into place?
Right. That's the goal
and then,
there.
And then put the things around them that just say, this works. Mm-hmm. This is synonymous with the surrounding environment.
That recreation of nature idea. Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's there's some real good artisans that can do that. Dan is one of them.
Yeah, it is more artwork, and you're changing gears completely, because when you so much of what we do is thought about drainage and engineering and how this is all going to get put together. But then when you start working with a fieldstone boulder, you really got to use the other side of your brain to make it look good.
Sure enough, yeah. Especially given the uniformity, not so much in size, but they're all big, they're all round, and they look out of place when they're gathered together. So you got to make them seem like you said, Bob, that they're meant to be cohesively together, a natural landscape in that regard. Because otherwise, they do look a little. Yep, there's a line of them.
Yep.
You can tell a human did that.
Yep.
And you're trying to avoid that. Do you sometimes, and I would think so, take the round guys and some other angular materials and mix them up so that it really has that sort of feel that you're searching for, that nature made this happen?
No, absolutely, and you'll see that even within the fieldstone family. You'll see stuff that looks more. I'm not sure if this is a word, but aggregate. Aggregate is typically a jagged, but the fieldstone can sometimes take that shape. So you're mixing and matching a lot. You're putting rocks up on a wall and taking them back down. There's a lot of up and down with that. It's not like working with a modular block wall where every unit's the same and you're just putting them up there and you don't even think about that. There's a lot of thought behind those walls to make them look good.
Sure, and you've got all these stones. These field stones laid out there, and you're literally sometimes going, I'm looking for right here, I need something that's just like, well, there it is, and it's over there, and you go get the one. It's the one.
And ironically, BT, that's pretty much how we do it.
Yeah.
We lay the stone out in front of us, and we do the same thing with, in our market, we see a lot of Fond du Lac wall stone, a lot of Chilton, which are both quarries in Wisconsin that are close to us. Same type of thing, even though that's more of a traditional kind of outcropping shape stone. But when you're dry stacking that product, they're not all the same, and
sure.
you're putting them up, taking them down, you're spreading them out in front of you, so you can do all that.
Yeah, and give them that kind of look, that natural look, as though they fell into place.
I think it would be good to maybe give some insight to our listeners about when we're talking about different types of stone. If we're looking at a patio, for instance, small patio, maybe to seat, a family of six or whatever, and then have a grill or whatever nearby, and they're looking for a natural product. And maybe we could talk a little bit about in the natural, like the different types of stone that we use, and irregular versus like an ashlar pattern. Maybe explain some of the different patterns that we use with those natural stones.
Absolutely. So what Bob was referring to is that, and a lot of these stones are quarried this way. They're quarried two different ways. So take, for example, a bluestone, which is a very popular stone. It comes from the East Coast. That is quarried in a modular pattern. They'll take different rectangles and different squares and package them together for us, and then we install them in a modular pattern. What Bob had mentioned, ashlar, which some people refer to as just random. And then that same stone will become quarried and what I like to call looking like kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. And you're piecing that together with your own brain and your own ingenuity, not so much an engineered process then. So, each one of these stones, if it's bluestone, if it's Chilton or Fond du Lac, and now you're seeing stuff from Wisconsin that's gauged, that is a sandstone as well, coming in the same format. So you have different options with natural stone, and it's one of the reasons why it really appeals to them.
Mm-hmm.
It gives them some originality. So an irregular pattern, you're going to have flat stones that are going to be, some are bigger, some are smaller, some are shaped like triangles, some are shaped like amoebas, some, they're just going to be very natural. And then if we get into a rectilinear pattern, which ashlar is one of the types of rectilinear, they'll take maybe 3 or 4 dimensions, like a 12 by 12, a 12 by 18, 12 by 24. And then you arrange those in kind of this pattern that kind of has some repetition to it. So it can bring some order or formality to a situation. If you need that, say, in the front of your house or whatever, and maybe in the back you want more of a natural, relaxed look, then you go more with the irregular. Not always that way, but that's just to give you 2 examples.
Or if you had a shallow area, you could arrange the lines in a way that made that shallow area visually seem deeper because of the way the lines are laid out and what have you, or vice versa. Shore something up on a visual level. That old Walt Disney fool the eye way of using lines and size and things like that.
And in the paver category, now we're seeing concrete products that are trying to mimic, or some have successfully, to a high degree, mimicked the natural stone, where you can do that same pattern I just described, but it's with a man-made product.
Sure.
And the price point's a little lower for that, and you still get kind of that essence or that feel of the natural stone.
The retaining wall stones and the manufactured people there, they've been doing that. It looks more quarried. It's got that look about it.
It's getting better,
and that's what people want. They want products that look more natural. So
now that polymeric sand, now you bring up bluestone. Does it have more of a blue hue to it then, and then sandstone's going to have a little more of a golden cast to it. The Chilton's a little more beige. So these different things. Can you formulate that polymeric sand with different colorations, and then when you lay that in there, it matches, or maybe contrasts. Depending on what you want to do, you can lay those different colors in too.
You're right about that. They're starting to catch up on that. There's a couple different color options, but the manufacturers are starting to see the light there with all the different applications they're using the polymeric sand for, and all the different products that they're using it against.
Yeah.
So we're starting to see more of that.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. It is neat.
That really adds a dimension, like you said, bringing up the polymeric sand that you guys just didn't have before, and it really ties things together and allows you to make those things more sealed and more maintenance, less maintenance as far as the weeds and any other number of things.
Exactly. The homeowners really, it makes their life much more simplistic having that, because it, like you said, eliminates the ants, eliminates the weeds, it eliminates chair legs getting stuck in between the grouting of the stone, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely, and a finished look, much more of a finished look there too.
Yep, the aesthetics. Yep.
So one last vibe here on the stone and the hardscaping. What about structures? Are people getting into you building things for them? Not just the pavers and not the patios, but do you get into constructing walls? Do you get into pizza ovens? Do you get into all the kind of things
fireplaces,
fire pits? Because you brought up the fire pits earlier, Bob. So I mean that a lot of that kind of stuff too. People are living more outside. They don't just want to be there; they want to live there.
You're right about that. And the one nice thing about working in this market in Minnesota is we cherish our outdoor time, right? So people are willing to invest. It never ceases to surprise me how much money people are willing to spend, given the fact that we really, 3 or 4 months where it's really nice to be outside. Now, I'm one of those guys that grills year round, but
me too.
most people are.
Me too.
Yeah. Well, and I'm out there in my landscape, I think, as much in the autumn as I am in this, and maybe even a little more so sometimes, because it gets a little hot out there sometimes, and I love it when it's, we're doing a little autumn weather here in May, but I guess what I'm saying is I'm fine with a 57-degree day, a little overcast if the wind is light.
Light jacket,
I got my
sweatshirt.
chimney going. I got a little hot chocolate out there, and I'm grooving on it, and it's September or October or whatever the case may be.
It's your Zen time.
Yeah, exactly. So
but we are seeing the interesting thing about what you had mentioned previously about the fireplaces and the pizza ovens and the outdoor kitchens is manufacturers of block and pavers have really caught on to that trend, and they almost all of them offer kits now for building these structures, which is a great economic price point to get in. And then there's still we've always done, and we'll continue to do the custom stuff as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bob, when it comes to the design side of things, is that become, and things like that, have they become more of a request and more of a desire for customers to have those kind of functional outdoor units, whether it's a fire pit to gather around, whether it's a pizza oven to cook together around, or just outdoor kitchen type settings in indeed that sort of environment?
When you think about it, what drives that is what are the amenities they can have outside that extends the amount of time they want to spend outside. Mm-hmm. So if they need more or desire more things to do, then we incorporate into the landscape design all amenities that will allow them to move from one thing to another.
Yeah.
And that when they're not using certain amenities, that they can still have a place in the landscape without being an annoyance. Mm-hmm. So you can get too many bells and whistles going sometimes in small spaces or whatever, but that's what you find out from the client in the process is what are their priorities, and then staging the priorities with the solutions and ideas, and then saying, yeah, you can have a pizza oven with the fireplace. So sometimes you may only want to use the fireplace for burning wood and just sitting around it, or Friday night is pizza night at our house. Mm-hmm. And so you know that you're going to be firing up that oven 12 months a year if you want.
Yeah.
And throwing pizza out there. That's kind of fun, whether you're ice skating on the rink that you just did, or
with the perimeter landscaping.
Or you're having folks over for a summer afternoon.
But obviously, then factoring in that pizza oven, for instance, if you're going to do it 12 months out of the year, it's not going to be on the opposite side of the yard. It's going to be relatively close to your ingress and egress for the mm-hmm. dining room, kitchen, or whatever the case may be.
Functionality.
And, you got to have it a place that's easy to get to.
Yep.
And then put your herb garden right next to it, and you're rocking. Life is good.
One thing about pizza ovens, every one we've ever done has gotten used just an unbelievable frequency. Homeowners just
more so than customers thought would happen. You think?
Certainly more so than I thought.
Than you thought?
Would.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think probably more so than the customers too. I think there's an element of fun there that it's kind of like a fire pit too. Some people they just like to burn stuff, right? But they like to cook pizzas too. Who doesn't?
But they probably discovered some things that they could do that they weren't thinking about. They were thinking a pizza oven. That's what it's called. But next thing you know, they're doing multiple loaves of bread out there, and they're doing other things. They're cooking a brazier-style piece of meat out there because it's an oven after all that kind of stuff.
Again, we talk about process being just as important as outcome. Yeah. And the other thing, too, with pizza in an outdoor oven is it just tastes so much better. I mean, we're talking restaurant culinary style quality, even with some of the generic stuff that comes from big box stores. When it's thrown in an outdoor pizza oven, it makes a huge difference in the taste.
Well, and the fact that you can crank that oven up if you want, you can get that 800-degree temp, which is a real pizza temp, as opposed to, you're going to get 500 degrees on your indoor oven only if you're in the cleaning mode.
Right.
Some of them will go that high, but 5 is fine, but 8's great.
Yep.
No, you
you're
just
right
get
about
that beautiful crust and that bubbling mozzarella on top when you got that high temp going.
And people don't realize that. They don't realize how hot the pizza ovens get. So that's somewhat of an eye-opener for them, and how fast the pizza cooks. There's no 25 minutes. I mean, it's 5-6 minutes and you're done. So it's like a microwave.
Yeah, next
so
one
that's a good point, too, because then you can turn out a lot of food in a short amount of time for a large number of people.
Yeah, and just keep cranking them out. People can make their owns and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Well, that's really heartening to hear from your perspective that folks, they ask for it because there's a bit of an expense going into that. It's a built structure, and you build them right. You want them to last for a long time, but that they're getting more use out of it than even you would have expected. That's really great.
No, you're absolutely right. And the neat thing is you drive by and you just happen to be driving by one of your old projects and you see them out there, and that's pretty neat.
What's even neater is when they notice it's your truck and they go, "Come on!" and they got a cold beer and a pizza ready for Dan. And, and Dan's got a minute or two to stop in and have a moment and take a load.
I'm always ready for pizza and beer.
Right on. What a treat having you here on the show, man. Really good conversation, good topics. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure our podcast listeners did as well. A lot of good different directions here to go with the hardscaping out there, my friend.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, come back and join us again, won't you?
Will do.
Any parting shots there, Bob Harvey?
Just a quick thing about Memorial Day.
Please
Red,
do,
white, and blue. We think about where we can create and how we can create those things, maybe in containers. And peonies, we have red peonies, red roses, red begonias, red carnations, red lilies, and the list goes on in the annuals category for your red. For white, we have phlox, we have alyssum, we have daisies. We have lamb's ear, which has the silvery, whitish texture, petunias, and million bells. For the blues, we have the salvias, we have balloon flower, laurentia, lobelia, and pulmonaria, and petunia.
And not too many weeks out, we'll be able to mention many of those again because 4th of July will be
4th of July is coming. We'll be
corner.
celebrating in style.
Yes, we will, my friend. Thanks for joining in for the Landscape and Garden Show. My name is Brian Turner.
Bob Harvey, Edelweiss Design.
And we will see you next week. Thanks for joining in.